All right, guys. Let's talk a little bit about um, the duties and responsibilities of a citizen, and we're going to talk about this in the context of eventually many Enlightenment philosophers who influenced American government. Um, I would say if there's one that you really better not forget for the semester, though, it's going to be John Locke. So as we talk um, about duties and responsibilities we have as citizens and what we do for our country, what our country does for us, we're going to do this in the context of the social contract as described by John Locke. And I'm not going to talk too much about natural rights at the moment. You may recognize that phrase modified a little bit in the Declaration of Independence. But I do want to first start out talking about what it means to have a social contract. And what John Locke meant was that we give up some of our freedom in exchange for a government. This meant that we have this sort of relationship with our government where, just to give one example, I give taxes, some of my earnings, to the government every year, and they in exchange take those earnings and they build roads, build schools, and provide basic services for all of us. With that, and there's many instances, we can even talk about this in a live Google Meet, of how exactly we give up some of our natural rights in exchange for government protection. And we'll also be looking at over the course of this video. Now, last week we looked at what a government does, and just as a quick reminder, I don't have the slide up, but they're supposed to provide basic services to us. They're supposed to protect us, whether that be from other people in our own society or from other societies. And they are also meant to provide laws and rules of order for society. Now, what this means for us as citizens, when you talk about responsibilities versus duties, there is basically a very simple way to keep it apart. Under North Carolina curriculum, they are two different things. And in general society, you're going to hear these two terms used interchangeably, and they're not. You'll hear somebody say, it's my patriotic duty to do something, when really what they ought to be saying is it's patriotic responsibility. For instance, if I said it's my patriotic duty to go vote, that's not technically accurate by the definitions that North Carolina uses on their standards. So a responsibility is just something you should do. If no one can punish you for doing an action, it is a responsibility. Compared to a duty, your duties are things you can be punished for not doing. So for instance, people say, we all have a patriotic duty to vote. Now, can we be arrested, fined, or in some way punitively punished for not voting? And if the answer is no, it's not technically a duty. It is technically a responsibility to your country. That's not necessarily me trying to say don't do it. I'm just saying it's not an official duty. All right. So just some textbook examples and some things we do. I mean, I've seen recently that your generation's getting pretty good about volunteering compared to previous generations, for instance, and that could be an example that you show. Hopefully it's not just for college resumes. Hopefully it's, shall we say, a more caring attitude towards society in general. But the best example of a responsibility is probably to vote. We have a responsibility to help maintain our country, and that's one way we would do this. Having respect, contributing to the community, whether through volunteering, paying attention to what's going on in your country, paying attention to who's running for president, and understanding their goals and their vision for our country. So compared to some things that we all have a duty to our country. We all have a duty to obey our country's laws. However minor or major that may be. We all have a patriotic duty to pay our taxes. Patriotic or not, maybe I shouldn't say patriotic, because Americans generally have an attitude that we don't like taxes. I mean, our country is founded on a tax revolt, is one way you can frame the American Revolution. But we do have to pay our taxes whether we like it or not. Registering for the draft, generally a responsibility, or a duty rather. They're using terms interchangeably again, but generally a duty we associate with being an 18-year-old male, and you can be called up to, I want to say 27 years old, you can be called for the military. Having haven't done that in nearly 50 years now, but it's there. We have to serve on a jury. None of us really like it, but and you'll find all sorts of people coming up with all sorts of wild excuses to get out of jury duty, but it is something we have to do for our country. And really, attend school, I could even throw that in with obeying laws. I mean, there's what we call compulsory attendance laws. So there have been some discussions concerning the draft. For instance, should we require women to register for the draft? You can follow up on this. I pasted this in this PowerPoint back in 2019, as you can see from the dates. Costs and benefits, I mean, everything's going to have a cost, even if it's just the time. And the benefit might just be that you feel better about yourself. The benefit might be something for the community. So just some things you may want to think about as you go back through the list, and I'll probably save this more for a class discussion. But just to go ahead and throw it out there and say something to think about. What's it cost to vote? What's the benefit of voting? What's it cost to run for office? What's the benefit of being in office? But then we'll talk about, we do have a standard of looking at how does our nation compare to others. So most countries in the Western world and the Western democracies have very similar sets of responsibilities and duties. Now, there are some nations that may, for instance, require allegiance to a leader. Say, for instance, in North Korea, the Kim family, that's where everyone's allegiance is meant to go. Now, in America, if you ever find a military officer, ask them about their oath. They will happily tell you what the oath is to. You do not actually pledge allegiance in the military to the flag. I think we've got an attitude in America that a lot of people think that's where the allegiance is always to. But if you ask someone in the military, your allegiance is actually to the Constitution. Allegiance to the flag is a little bit more symbolic. I'm not saying we shouldn't pledge allegiance to the flag, but I'm saying that if you read the Constitution, it says that all oaths are to the Constitution. And maybe the term oath could be used a little bit simultaneously here. Oaths, however, whether it be from the president, Congress, whatever, the Constitution itself actually says all oaths for anyone serving in national offices are to this Constitution. Most nations are going to have an oath in some way to the country itself in the West, not necessarily to the leader or anything else. Just wanted to clarify that out. The president's oath is not to the flag. The president's oath is to the Constitution. Some nations may require you to observe a religious law. Now, in America, we have no official religion. The Constitution forbids us from establishing an official religion of the United States, actually. So although it may be like a de facto, most people follow a religion, it's not technically law. Some nations have a compulsory military, or if not military, some sort of public service. You will find people who have an argument that America should have some sort of mandatory public service. And most people who do this say it doesn't necessarily have to be military, but you have to do public service in some way. What that may mean, I mean, look at what public services that you might be able to be involved in. That might mean that you have to serve the post office, for instance, for a few years. That might mean you have to serve in Peace Corps. But that would mean that in some way you need to serve the government, the country in some way. Some people feel like this helps build more allegiance to the country. We've all worked and served it in some way. There's other nations that we can talk about why you may have compulsory military, for instance. There could be some good reasons for it. If you look at, say, the geopolitical climate of Israel, if you look at their nation's history and situations surrounding them, we could then talk about why would they have compulsory military, whereas America does not. So hopefully that'll give you an introduction, and we'll talk more about this at length later on. This will eventually lead to, at what point do you have an obligation, or at what point would you not be willing to serve your duties to a country? At what point would you say that the government has broken its social contract and I am no longer obligated to serve my country? And that's the sort of question that is asked going into the American Revolution. Our founding fathers asked themselves, do we still owe a social contract to Britain? So thank you for watching. Have a good day.